1960s, American pop dominated the music charts, but all that was about to change.
I mean, yeah, woo, you know, that was Little Richard? No. Yes? No. You know.
Doing our thing, and then we went, uh-huh, something has happened here. Here came the self-contained group that was writing their own material, and we were scared. I mean, we was going out, what are we going to do? We can't write for them. They're writing their own songs.
I'd gotten used to having a certain amount of record royalty every year. I just took that for granted, and all of a sudden it was drying up, you know. And so I did what I thought was a pretty smart thing.
Is it possible to get a picture of you, 2 foot by 4 foot, to fit on my bedroom wall?
I had a painter do portraits of the Beatles and got the license to market Beatle pictures. And for about a year, in that middle 60 period, I made more money selling pictures of the Beatles than I was selling my, my own records. Within a couple of years, they took over the record business. And there was no way to stop this incredible British invasion.
Nobody in America would buy anything from any other category or other genre of music. It had to be that kind of Beatle beat stuff. I was noticing that they were doing a lot of sort of passing chords that I'd learned in folk music. Like instead of going like from here to here to here, they'd go, and then.
Music changed from becoming a keyboard-oriented music business to a guitar-oriented business.
It came together and, you know, nicely in, dare I say, harmony.
Like many other British groups in the 60s, the Kinks' style was based on black American rhythm and blues. Ironically, they were so good at recreating it that their record company, Pi, originally wanted them to stick with cover versions of R&B classics.
Pi, quote-unquote, ordered me to do a first single that of Long Tall Sally, the old Little Richard song, which I did sort of under protest, but I figured what the hell, they were paying for it. And it turned out okay, but it was hardly the Kinks. And at that point, they and I rebelled.
But the first British act to follow the Beatles to the #1 spot in the American charts were the Animals.
There is a house in New Orleans they call the Rising Sun, and it's been the ruin of many a poor boy. And God, I know I'm one.
The House of the Rising Sun was one of 2 covers they made of Nina Simone tracks, and she was not amused.
She looked at me and said, so you're the hunky bastard who took my song and screwed it up, and I just said, wait a minute, you know, if you're going to complain about us taking that song, and recording it, why don't you admit to the fact that, you know, you've made fortunes out of singing work songs from prison work songs from guys who are still doing time on the chain gang down there in Angola State Prison. And she was pretty shocked that I would know that much. And from that point on, it was like, oh, okay, my name's Nina Simone, what's your name? In the early days on the road in the States, we'd wander into black clubs, and people would look at us sideways and say, you know, what's these honky guys doing in here? And then I'd get up on stage and sing with people like Grant Green and Louis Jordan and people like that, and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, and they would immediately open their hearts, you know, to you. The music is the answer. Music is the key, and it's religion.
Blues may have been central to the sound of the Animals, but they made sure that America was well aware of their nationality.
We used to actually put Made in England or Made in Britain on the label in America, and it wasn't. It was pressed in America, but it was, Union Jacks on everything.
Although British performers may have had the golden touch, some of the groups still look to America for their songs.
Every other Sunday for 5 years, I was on an aeroplane to America. And next morning, up and working. And it was from 9:30 till 9:30 at night, going from publisher to publisher, from Monday to Friday, really. I saw everybody. Everybody would see me, I saw. And there I found the tunes in the Brill Building and places like that.
In this dirty part of the city where the sun forgets to shine.
We had written for the Righteous Brothers, so it was a very Righteous Brothers kind of demo. I mean, it was a great demo. And when the Animals cut it, they changed the feel, they changed the chords, they changed the words, they changed everything.
In this dirty old part of the city where the sun refused to shine, yeah. People tell me there ain't no use in trying, yeah.
They did what was right for themselves, arrangement-wise. I mean, it felt like a working-class guy was singing this, a guy whose father or he worked in the coal mines. I mean, it really was a working-class song, and that's what the arrangement felt like. My demo has a whole other kind of feel to it. Listen to this. It gets so jazzy. Yeah, listen. Pretty wild.
Watch my daddy living down here.
It's a whole other feeling. Very easy. You can hear the Righteous Brothers. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Mickey Most, who produced the record, really could hear how it should be done for the Animals.
What's my daddy say?
Terrible ending. Oh, come on. I got to turn that off. It's too terrible.
The Animals had talent. They were a great band. I actually thought they were a better band than the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
So far, no British band had rivaled the Beatles' supremacy in America, but the Rolling Stones were gaining momentum by projecting a much raunchier image.
You knew that with the Beatles, There was arousal, but no possibility of penetration. But the Rolling Stones related much more to this primal sexual awareness, to the point where they made an art form, a cottage industry, out of the notion, hide your wives and lock up your daughters. The Rolling Stones are coming to town.
Like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones had a great affection for rock and roll, but their real passion was the urban sound of Chicago blues.
They more closely resemble the root American promulgators of this music than anybody else, and still do. And of course, it has so much to do with Keith Richards as well as Mick, because he drives the music.
The first thing you get waylaid with, being like a white kid from England, is what the hell are you doing playing the blues? But the fact is that you need hard times for the best music to come out. You know, it's maybe that's why the English invaded here, because we all lived on rations and things weren't so pretty when we were growing up. You know what I mean? So in a way, you know, we had our blues, like courtesy of Adolf. You know.
The Stones were well aware that if they wanted to match the Beatles' impact on the world of pop, they'd have to write their own songs.
You just sit down, you know, a couple of drinks, a couple of fags, you know, say, oh, that's nice. Right? And then suddenly Mick will walk in, and they start singing over the top, and suddenly it starts to come together.
The writing of Satisfaction started with a Keith Richards guitar riff.
It was a blues dream. I just woke up in the middle of the night, and without even knowing it, I pushed play on my little early cassette player, played it, went back to sleep. I woke up, and there is 30 seconds of Satisfaction, you know, in a very slow version, you know, soulful blues version. I can't get no satisfaction. I can't get me no satisfaction, because I try, and I try, yeah, I try, yeah, I try.
Jagger and Richards' English take on the blues sound helped them rival Lennon and McCartney as songwriters. But the Beatles themselves were more influenced by Tamla Motown, the Detroit-based record company already well established by the time of the British invasion. With artists like the Marvelettes, Little Stevie Wonder and the Miracles, Motown was the first record company to take black music to a global audience. And this success frustrated rival record labels.
Motown were running away with the charts, and we did nothing with our Wilson Pickett's and our Salmonbergs. Otis Redding made a little dent, but nothing compared to Motown, because there was something built into the Motown sensibility that went directly to the white heart.
Everybody was listening to Motown music, and that was because I think it was a universal thing, and it was something that people felt good about, and it was artistic too, and it also had the simplicity of the blues, but the complexities of jazz, and the trueness of the country or the folk or whatever it was, and so we never put labels on it. It was just called Motown music, you know.
A key element in the success of Motown was the three-man songwriting team, brothers Brian and Eddie Holland and Lamont Dozier. Starting with Heatwave in 1963, Holland Dozier Holland wrote no fewer than 59 million selling records, easily outrivaling any of the other 60s songwriters.
A good 250 days out of the year, we were jamming in the studio. We were in there pounding away, and no vacations really. Our job was to turn out hits. We were like Santa Claus and his little elves, you know, turning out the toys for Christmas. We would get kind of heavy with it, and why a girl would like to hear certain words, and why certain things were appealing to the ear of the masses more so than something else, and hitting that target every time where you at least get 1 million people to rush out to the store. You know what I mean? And it has to do with a lot of you know, reaching a certain vulnerable spot in each listener, and you have to hit them wherever that, I like to call it a sweet spot, because the minute you hit them with that little taste of sweetness there, and they just can't bear it, you know, they can't just have one bite, they had to go buy it so they can play it all the time.
The Supremes were Holland Dozier Holland's biggest act. The three songwriters provided the group with a run of 5 consecutive #1s. But Holland Dozier Holland, taking their cue from an older generation of Tin Pan Alley factory writers, was so prolific that they still had material piling up, waiting for the right opportunity.
We had cut the track, and it had been sitting there for 3 or 4 months, and we hadn't assigned it to anybody or even thinking about the song. Until one time we were reviewing the empty tracks that we had, and this thing, baby, I need your love, this came out of me, and then we finished it off, and the top said, "But hey man, when are you guys gonna, you know, really give us a shot at this thing? We've been sitting around here a year, blah 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 blah. Okay, hey, what about, yeah, okay, go to the studio and baby, I need," their first top 10. All of them were fun to work with, but the tops were like really fun. I mean, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, eating barbecue ribs and drinking cold duck, and you know, barbecue all over the microphones, and we're eating and singing. It was just a party, and that's the way we had fun. It was more of a party than a job, but it was always business though, because the bottom line was that at the end of the day, we had to come up with a hit. We definitely listened to the Beatles. We definitely listened to Brian Wilson. But it was so great, and I loved it because it kept us on us. You know, it gets you riled up. It got the three of us so keyed up and so happy about it when you see somebody else creating, that you're not the only one doing it. It's somebody else really, you know, on your tail.
The surf sound of Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys had made them a household name in America well before the Beatles arrived. They'd scored several big hits over the previous 2 years.
A bushy, bushy blonde hair, surfing USA.
The great thing about the 1960s is you had all these different voices all converging, and some of them influencing one another. Brian Wilson having some sort of almost like unspoken competition with Paul McCartney, you know.
We were jealous of the Beatles because they were getting so much recognition, So Mike and I went out and had dinner one night after we heard the Beatles, heard all about the Beatles and heard some of the records. And we said, let's go, let's hit the road, let's start making some good records, you know. But I couldn't write on the road. I couldn't get myself to write songs on the road. I needed to be home to write. And I told the guys, we had a meeting one afternoon, and I told the guys, I said, look, I'm quitting the touring group in favor of writing some good songs for you guys. I felt at home in a studio. It's like more at home there than anywhere in the world. Well, the group didn't mind. I explained to them, I just want to try something kind of left field, a little bit different. And they go, cool, go ahead. Yeah.
Right now we're going to do a very pretty song that Carl Wilson sings very beautifully.
God Only Knows was one of the standout tracks on Pet Sounds, the album that's widely seen as Brian Wilson's greatest achievement.
Paul McCartney told the press that he thought that was one of the prettiest songs ever written.
I may not always love you, but long as there are stars above you, you'll never need to doubt it. I'll make you so sure about it. God only knows what I'd be without you.
Pet Sounds, first of all, was one of the best mixed records, besides how, you know, great the songs were on it and the way that they were sequenced. Everything about it. It's one of the best albums ever made, and right up there, you know, the top 3 probably.
Despite critical acclaim, God Only Knows was only a minor hit when it was released as a single in 1966.
I love the colorful clothes you wear.
But the next Beach Boys single made an enormous impact, topping the charts later in the same year.
I hear the sound of a gentle wind on the wind that lifts her perfume through the air. I'm picking up good vibrations. She's giving me the excitations. I'm picking up good vibrations. She's giving me the excitations. Good vibrations.
One of the most complex pop songs ever released, Good Vibrations was an elaborate concoction of multi-layered harmonies, rhythm tracks and sound effects. The song was the end product of 6 weeks intensive recording.
We used 6 different studios. I wrote them in sections, and in 6 different studios. Then we strung them all together in one studio, and put all those different parts into one. It's like I'm picking up. That was one studio, and I love you, colorful clothes. That was in another studio. It all blended together. We put it all together.
Good vibrations, excitation, good vibrations, excitation, good vibrations.
His melodies are timeless. They're somewhat locked in the image of the band, the Beach Boys, and I think they're harder to imagine outside of those performances in the same way as the Beatles songs are, because they're so stylized. The brilliant arrangements as they are, they're very imprinted with that style of performance, which other songs are not, like the songs of Gershwin aren't, because we don't have his voice. That's the disadvantage of this great 60s songwriters. There isn't the same thought of them being, everybody's property to sing. And actually some of them are so very difficult to sing, it's impossible.
It wasn't just the Beach Boys and the Beatles who sang in the highly distinctive close harmony style.
One evening down in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, the Four Seasons had a gig at some less than famous and less than lustrous nightclub. It was a bar, it was a joint. There was nobody in the room, and Frankie was a little bit maybe bored, and so he started to imitate Nellie Lutcher, who had had years before a song called I Can't Give You Anything But Love. And so Frankie is doing, I can't give you anything but love, baby. And I go, what is that sound?
Let's hang on to what we got. Don't let go, girl, we
Making full use of Frankie Valli's startling falsetto, Bob Crewe and band member Bob Gaudio wrote a string of memorable hits for the Four Seasons.
I was fascinated with their sound. Their harmonies were tight, they sounded black, and yet they were white. I said, go home, and I don't care what you write. Write something with an octave jump that makes Frankie go, so it goes from his regular voice up to that incredible falsetto that he just sang. I said, I don't care what he's singing. Sing bananas. I said, I don't care what you sing.
Crewe never felt threatened by the British invasion.
What a wonderful thing to have that kind of infusion. It was being called an invasion. I was not a bit fearful of it at all. I mean, if anything, it had its own identity, and they went on to do what they could only do, you know, and the seasons kept on going.
But Crewe and Gaudio's biggest seller was a solo hit for Valli.
Bobby came over. I said, look, I've got this idea. It goes like this. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. You'd be like heaven to touch. I want to hold you so much. At long last, love has arrived, and I thank God is alive. Well, he said, hold it. Hold it. And he said, your concept is great. He said, the lyric is fabulous. He said, but let me forward this a minute. Then he started playing those inversions. You know, I'm getting goosebumps, look, thinking of it. That afternoon, he and I wrote our biggest song, Can't Take My Eyes Off You.
You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off you. You'd be like heaven to touch. I wanna hold you so much. At long last, love has arrived, and I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off you.
There are about 200 recordings on it. And the song itself was, the announcement was made last year that it's the number 5 most played American song.
In New York, a classically trained songwriting duo were also bringing the X factor to what sounded like easy listening tunes. But composer Burt Bacharach and his lyricist partner Hal David's Midas touch with melodies had brought them big hits in the late 1950s. A decade on, they had acquired a reputation for writing instant classics. They wrote all of their 60s hits in the place that symbolized pre-Beatles pop, the famous Brill Building.
We had a little office with a pretty beat-up piano at no air. The windows didn't open. And Hal smoked in those days nonstop. I didn't smoke. I wasn't as allergic or hated smoke as much as I do now. And we just got through it. Hal kept smoking away, and we kept writing.
He'd have a melody for me that I liked,
and he'd put it on a cassette, and I'd take it home, and then after dinner at night I'd listen to his cassette, and I'd start to try to write a lyric to that. And at night he would look at my lyric, put it up on the piano, and very often we were writing 3 songs at one time.
I'd like to bring out Dionne Warwick singing Anyone Who Had a Heart.
Bert was not only a wonderful composer, but one of the all-time great arrangers. And as he wrote music, he thought of the whole arrangement at the same time.
But look at me, and know I dream of you, knowing I love you so. Anyone who had a heart would take me in his arms and love me too. You couldn't really have a heart and hurt me like you hurt me and be so untrue.
We were very lucky with Dionne Warwick because she is such a superb musician. She can do anything. So we weren't limited in what we could write for her. And if you look at the material we've written for her, I mean, it's from A to Z, because she could do it.
If you see me walking down the street and I start to cry each time we meet, walk on by. Walk on by. Make believe that you don't see the tears. Just let me grieve in private, 'cause each time I see you, I'll break down and cry. Walk on by. Stop.
Bacharach was not only a skilled songwriter, but a masterful orchestrator and producer. His arrangements of his own Walk On By and Anyone Who Had a Heart for Dionne Warwick are now regarded as the definitive versions of these much-covered tunes. But one Bacharach and Warwick collaboration may have been improved by someone else.
It's better than the version we made. It's great. You know, people change melody. So often that's an advantage, but with Aretha, she changed melody and made it better.
Aretha Franklin's gospel-style performance brought an extra dimension to I Say a Little Prayer. But the real appeal of Bacharach and David's work was always down to the perfect combination of strong melodies, brilliant arrangements, and subtle, understated lyrics.
Bacharach and David, they weren't, you know, hit cats in the 60s, and like, I'm hazarding a guess that they never used to go out to clubs and take drugs with the rest of them. So where it all came from, I haven't got a clue. But they were fantastic songwriters in its purest sense. That's why they stood the test of time like no others, you know.
Another style of music to come in from the cold and achieve commercial success during this culturally rich decade was white American folk. Largely ignored in the past, folk became fashionable in the 1960s, thanks mainly to one man.
Oh, my name, it ain't nothing. My age, it means less. The country I come from is called the Midwest. I was taught and brought up there, the laws to abide, and that the land that I live in has God on its side.
In 1965, Bob Dylan took a bold step away from his purist roots towards a more contemporary style, blending folk with rock and roll. But in his career as a politically aware protest singer, he'd attracted a large and loyal following, while influencing even the most successful musicians.
I remember running into George Harrison in L.A., and George said, we kind of had a fight with Bob Dylan. I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't know. Well, Bob was talking to John, and he was saying, man, you guys have this platform, and you're up here, but you should be saying something. And they started writing songs, you know, a little deeper after that.
Dylan led the way for any number of songwriters, myself included. He had the lyrical imagination, but once he fused it with a beat, he opened up the possibility of lots of people, some of them not as talented as him, to follow his lead, but some who were equally talented but utterly different, I don't think could have existed if Dylan hadn't been there first.
I think the most impact that he had was bringing the folk artists into rock and roll, which elevated the songwriting immediately.
The Byrds are a good example of like maybe taking the melodic and harmonic element of the Mersey sound and the folk poetry, you know, that was in Dylan, and they shared a lot of common influences.
Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. In the jingle jangle morning, I'll come following you. Take me for a trip upon your magic swirling ship. All my senses have been stripped.
The Byrds' version of Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man went to the top of the charts in the summer of 1965. They'd chosen the song as their debut single after hearing an unreleased tape of Dylan playing it, but their version was very different from his.
Bob was doing it in a 2/4 time, more like a traditional folk song. Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. I'm not sleepy and there ain't no place I'm going to. Hey, I was listening to the Beatles. In fact, I was one of the few people in the folk community to kind of get what they were doing, and stuck my neck out and was doing that kind of stuff. So I had the idea of changing it up to more of like a Beatle beat, and I thought, you know, and I'd also been playing around with a little Bach-like stuff, and I thought if I put some of that on the front of it, like this, and then this beat to it, it might come out okay, and it worked.
Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. I'm not sleepy and there ain't no place I'm going to. Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me.
By the end of 1965, the musical hybrid which Dylan had pioneered, folk rock, was one of the dominant sounds in American pop.
The combination of Dylan and the Beatles, Dylan making it okay for the folk acts to come in, the Beatles writing really good rock and roll songs, really good songs that were being played as rock and roll songs. The combination of those two, I think, had a great impact, the greatest impact on rock and roll songwriting. It became an art form.
But not everyone classified as folk rock wanted to be associated with the seriousness attached to the style.
We hated folk rock as a term. You know, it was just so wimpy sounding. And I mean, after all, we were trying to come with a bit of an R&B feel sometimes. Nobody seemed to notice that aspect of it, though. So I guess we were stuck with it, and as such got lumped in with several groups who we thought, yeah, well, that's kind of the idea, but gee, guys, you know, we're trying to do an original American thing.
Or rhythm and blues, just go and listen. It'll start with a
I think there was a feeling that you couldn't write love songs and that you had to be involved in protest music, and the Spoonful took great pleasure in ignoring every bit of that advice, because it was our feeling that what really was out there were beautiful 16-year-old girls. We were all writing for the next 20 minutes. And the shelf life that these things have had is astonishing to me. But there was never any intent of having it last any longer than the next blip on the charts.
Summer in the city, back of my neck getting dirty gritty.
Between John and Paul and Brian Wilson, something was going to change so drastically in the next 20 minutes that you might be out of the picture.
The diversity created by the many influences that went into 60s music was a major part of what made the period unique.
I grew up in the 1960s, and it was a very rich time because you had music of all different styles, speaking in different voices, but all on the radio at the same time. You assume it's always going to be like that, and then when you get a little older and it goes away, it's only then you realise what exceptional sort of maybe 8 or 9 years we were living through. You know, the springiness of the Motown records and the rhythmic excitement and the angular nature of Burt Bacharach's melodies, but also the music, say, of the Byrds is also very angular and modern sounding. It's modernist, inside the realms of pop music. People seem to forget that was all happening simultaneously, and if you were a kid, as I was, it's just filling your head with all these possibilities.
For many people, the high point of 60s music came during the second half of the decade.
The middle to the later Beatles to me were like absolutely the best. Clever arrangements, wonderful material, a lot of variances, a lot of different styles. Terrific.
There's nothing you can do that can't be done.
The Beatles developed so quickly that they soon moved light years away from their rock and roll roots and were coming up with songs and arrangements of a kind that had never been heard before.
In 1964, if you had said to anybody, even even the musicians themselves, that this was an art form, they'd have laughed. And in 1969, if you said to any of the musicians, this isn't an art form, they'd have hit you. So that's how quickly the whole way that rock and roll saw itself, the way it saw itself, how that changed 180 degrees, really. And there's no other period in popular music, I think, where you can see such a totally radical change in such a short period.
I think we got zapped. I mean, the powers that be said the 60s are it. This is the start of the way music is going to be from now on. All the little nuances and all the little playing and licks that we could possibly drum in, we're going to give it to the 60s. I think that's what the powers that be say. We'll give it to the 60s and it'll last forever.
Next week, Walk On By takes it easy with a laid-back story of 70s country rock. The band, the Eagles, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young.
I wanna live, I wanna give. I've been a miner for a heart of gold.
That's Walk On By, after the gold rush, next Saturday night on BBC Two.